Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining the CISO workshop series. We will start shortly. We're just going to give it a couple of more minutes for people to join. As I can see, more people are currently joining the event. Thank you very much, everyone, for joining me this morning. I'm Adriaan Bekker, Director of Microsoft Security Services here at Softwerx. And what we're going to be doing today during this webinar is take a closer look at Microsoft Purview, which is a very large subject. So I will be very open and honest. We are going to do a very high level overview today of Microsoft Purview. I'll try and rush through a lot of this from a point of view, but there's a significant subject matter to cover just to give everyone a high level overview. Just a bit of housekeeping as we progress. The session is being recorded and the recording will be made available afterwards. And if you have any questions during this time, feel free to put them in the Q&A panel and I will look to address these for you at the end of the session. Any other questions you might have, feel free to reach out to me directly or to one of the team as we progress today during the session. Now, what we are looking today and covering is Microsoft Purview, giving you an overview. Look more closely at some of the functions that's built into the M365 Purview stack or the compliance stack. That will include classifications, data loss prevention and compliance, and then also maybe talk through a little bit closer of where do I start, because it's such a big subject matter. And what we are seeing from customers is not 100% sure, how do we start this journey? Where do we have? Because technically it's not that difficult to implement, but it's all around testing and understanding how it will affect your organization. So hopefully I'll be able to give you a few hints or tips to where to start as we progress today. Now, before we get stuck in, I thought we'll create a new section called News, and I just wanted to make sure everybody's up to date with some of the highlights since the last session, and if you have not seen this. So firstly, Microsoft Teams is no longer going to be bundled inside the Microsoft Enterprise licenses for new customers. That means if you want to buy an M365 E3 license, you will be buying it without Teams, and you will need to add Teams Enterprise separately into the bundle. For the SMB customers, Business Premium, for example, you can still buy at the moment with Teams bundled in or without Teams. This all come about because Microsoft is trying to align the licenses, but also there's been a couple of lawsuits in the European Union regarding what they're allowed to include inside the bundle or not. That said, existing customers can still keep using their licenses with Teams bundled in, and I believe at the moment you'll be able to renew it, but we will keep an eye on that as we move forward. But please speak to your Microsoft partner or account manager who can help you with more details as we move on. Ironically, combining the two licenses or buying it separately does mean a slight price increase. So there's never a chance missed to increase a price, I find. The next piece is quite exciting for the people who's not aware of it. We've been covering Microsoft Copilot over the last few sessions. In April, restricted SharePoint search was being deployed, which meant that you can limit what Copilot can index and or have access to in the graph. You can have up to 100 sites that's available. So if you haven't done that or you haven't seen this at the moment, then go and have a look at it. If you are looking still to adopt Microsoft 365 Copilot, but you're worried about what it might bring back, or you want to limit it to a couple of test sites, that's now available. There will be a message above that says you've only seen restricted information, not everything inside the organization, but it's a great way to start. But again, once you've gone through that process, the objective obviously is to get through and release the Copilot into the whole of your information. New as well is Purview AI Hub, which is in preview. We don't know currently if there's going to be a license cost for business premium customers, for example, but it's part of the M365 E5, definitely. But what this will do is show you what artificial intelligence is being used inside your environment. This is very useful because there's a plugin for Edge, Chrome, and Firefox, Purview plugin, that will then notify you of where artificial intelligence or AI engines like ChatGPT, Microsoft Bing Chat, etc., is being utilized, and give you an overview of how much of your users are using Copilot. Have a look at it if you haven't done so. Trial it, test it, see if it's of interest, especially if you're currently adopting, as I said, AI in the organization. And then the last bit of news that I want to highlight is the 2024 Work Trade Index has been published. There's a link, and we'll send out the link afterwards. Makes a very interesting reading, and a few things that really caught my eye during that report is that 75% of employees are already using artificial intelligence or AI inside the business, which is really scary number. And of those, between 75 and 80% of employees is bring your own AI to work already, where they are using technology or AI engines, ChatGPT, etc., without the knowledge of the business. And that's a bit that's really surprised me. And one of the other stats was 46% of people have started trying to use it at work in the last 6 months. Of those people is using AI. This just shows, as an organizations that's on this call, for example, need to think is, what is our AI policy? What is our guidance to our staff? Because half of the staff actually said they don't admit to using AI at work because they're worried how it will be perceived or that it will put their job at risk. But they are using it for critical tasks during the survey. And that is, shall we say, is a bit of a concern, especially if you don't know what they are putting into those engines. What are the terms and conditions? What are those engines used for? So very much have a look at it, read through the report, makes a very interesting reading. But as I say, any questions, don't hesitate. Now let's get on to the actual subject matter today. Microsoft Purview. Don't always agree with the names. They keep changing. You had Office Purview, you had Azure Purview. It is now all called Microsoft Purview. Well, it's a comprehensive solution, and I'm going to say it's a single solution, but it's actually made up of loads of components. It's all licensed separately, or it's either included or not. So you have to go through the licensing, but it helps govern and understand your data, protect your information, and then also help you improve your security, risk, and compliance. And very quickly just ran through those 3 sections, but each one of those, as I say, has a significant impact, but it unifies your data protection, your data governance, and your risk inside the business into a single frame of glass or that they have, and a view for your organization. Now, every time I speak to organizations, security can be improved. Security access to the system, high-level access can be secured, devices can be encrypted, but data security is probably the biggest headaches that we're seeing. And securing your data has become such a difficult situation because we've got emails, we've got messages being sent via Teams or other chat engines. We've got data that's shared between people. We've got applications that people are using just because they might be useful. Shadow IT, as we talked about. We've also got devices, and we've got to find a way to secure all of our data across all of these methods on a continuous basis. And not only that, data growth is exponential. We're seeing 4.5 times data growth per annum is what some of the forecasts are saying, which is just phenomenal when you think about how much data do we have in the system, how much are we backing up, how much data are we stored, do we know what's in the data, do we even know who that data is being shared with? And we're seeing this challenge across most businesses. And we've got the whole GDPR situation, or want to retain only relevant information, especially with Copilot, bringing information back. Well, which is the correct information? This has become a significant challenge inside businesses, and it's not easy to make it work. Well, Microsoft's approach to data security, and as we're talking about Microsoft Purview, we'll talk about Microsoft's approach to data security is firstly to understand what information do you hold on the system? What documents do you have? What data do you have inside? What type of information do you have? Does it contain sensitive information? Does it contain personal information? And then providing you with a way to protect that sensitive data. And that can be through classifications, labeling, for example, retention, but you can then create and protect that sensitive information by understanding what that information is, classifying it, and then more importantly, have those labels travel with the document as needed. But then also managing the insider risk, because once you've classified the information, data is shared inside the business. Data is shared on an ongoing basis. Most people share information because they're trying to do their job, they're trying to work. But how do you deal with that insider risk? And that could be very much me moving a document that was classified or sensitive out of a management folder into a generic folder um, without knowing. And if I move that data, that was the inside risk. It might not have been malicious, but I made a mistake, and now sensitive information has been shared with the whole internal organization, or I accidentally send out a document, the wrong document. We've all done it, send an attachment, and then realize you sent the wrong attachment or made a mistake. It happens. It's not malicious. We're human, and it's understanding, but that insider risk is very much inside the organization. And then preventing data loss, as I said, uploading a file to Teams, sending a message out with all of the sensitive information, for example, of employee data, mailing out the payroll by accident. There's significant examples of data loss, but how do we prevent that data loss? How do we prevent that information leaving the organization and avoiding the situation where we have data that's been compromised or lost? So then that brings us to Microsoft Purview, and let's go through what is Microsoft Purview. Microsoft Purview, as I mentioned, covers governance, security, risk, and compliance. Now, data governance goes beyond what's in Microsoft 365. Microsoft 365 will index your data, everything in SharePoint, OneDrive, etc. for you, and you can get a view of what's happening. But you can extend that with things like Azure with Purview Data Map, which is Azure resources it utilizes. And it's in preview. A lot of these features in the data side is in preview. But with the data map, you can get an understanding of all the data in your organization across multiple clouds, not just what's inside Microsoft. So you can target containers, you can target data lakes, SQL databases, other databases, and you can create a data map. That will also help you then give you insight regarding valuable data inside the information. For example, who are the data owners? Do we have data owners assigned to it? What information, when last has the data been reviewed? But you can start building up insights regarding what you have inside your data that you have. You can also build up a data catalog, and data catalog will effectively create an index for you of all of your data, which means that when you want to do a search, if you have the right permissions, you can very quickly find all of that information that you need on an ongoing basis by just running a search very quickly. Then you can also create data policies, which will decide what do we do with data, who can have access to the information, what should happen with that data inside that information. For example, I want to assign permissions to a certain individual across all of my data. I can do that across all of my estate and data estate. And finally, data sharing. If you're working with other parties and you need to give them read-only access into the system, for example, SQL databases or blob storage, you can share that information with external parties through an API, for example, that will give them read-only access. Be aware, all of this is driven by Azure Purview or Microsoft Purview, but it's Azure resources, and depending on how much you're using, you will pay for the consumption of the throughput, the amount of data you have, etc. And there is a pricing calculator. Now, for most of the customers tend to start off with mid-sized businesses with N365 E5 or Business Premium, and looking more around the data security. And this is where we start thinking about what can we do with the various areas. Firstly, we've got information protection, and that is very much how do I classify my data? How do I protect that data and ensure that it's not left? I can create a data label, for example, that says IT only, IT team only, and as provided I'm part of that IT team, I can access that information. Anybody outside that IT team cannot, even if that document is moved to another folder or another location, which means that that information is protected, classified, and and has sensitivity applied to it. We can also then move on to what we call data loss prevention. Because we've now labeled and classified our information, we can start setting up behavior and policies regarding data loss. For example, if a document has been classified as sensitive, internal only, and I try and paste it into a chat message with an external party, it will prevent me from doing that. Or if I try and mail it outside of the organization, but because it's not been classified to be for public consumption or general consumption, it will block me from sending that message. And that's very important. Having ways to think about what information are we uploading? Why are we uploading it? And because you've got all of that information, you can then understand. Another area is information barriers. Where we have larger organizations or teams that's working in sensitive areas that's not allowed to communicate or interact, you can create information barriers to prevent them from sharing information and making sure that they don't accidentally get access to information they should not, because, and this could be trading information, it could be schools, it could be anything that you think about where information is not allowed to be shared between teams. You can also start looking at insider risk management, and this is probably one of the areas that we see not being adopted as much as it should be, and it's one of those areas where half the time the biggest part of your risks is. Let's be honest, users are trying to do their job, move data, send out information. You can look at the behavior to see, firstly, is it being malicious? What type of behavior are they? What are they doing with data? Is it a potential risk to the business? Do I need to educate my user to say, sorry, our policy is you should not be sharing personal information via email, for example, between colleagues. And you can start looking at those risks, but it's also the more malicious risks. For example, I resign and suddenly I download 50 sensitive information with all of our, that's classed as highly sensitive, to a USB stick. Question mark, why am I doing that? Or trying to mail that out to myself, or starting to print. So you can start looking at behavior and set up rules and automation regarding what can be done, what cannot be done. And then finally, privileged access management. And we've done this before where we talked privileged identity management. So previously, you can escalate your permissions, making sure that you have the right identity to do your job. But the next step is to activate privileged access management to our really sensitive information, where we want to classify and authorize access. So for example, there might be a certain mailbox, or somebody in IT wants to go and access somebody else's mailbox. That's not part of their day-to-day job. They might see sensitive information. There's a path that can be followed that says, can you approve access to this particular piece of data? And that can be built up and used to really create granular control regarding access to sensitive parts of the system and access part area. Then we get into risk and compliance management. We've got a number of sections here: auditing, where you can see what's happening inside your information; communication compliance, which looks at communications, for example, what's being said. Is somebody using profanity? Is somebody abusing any of their colleagues, mistreating them? We can look at the communication that's happening, and I'll explore that a bit more. We've also got the compliance manager module, which helps you manage compliance inside of your organization, which things like ISO 27001, data lifecycle management, which again, you can label data retained for 7 years, retained indefinitely, but automate the reduction or removal of information inside the area, but we'll explore this. And finally, e-discovery or advanced e-discovery premium, as they call it. We can look at finding information depending on whether it is. And we will look at all of these sections in more details now. But as we can see, Microsoft, when somebody says, I would like to implement Microsoft Purview, where do I start? How much of this is it? It's not an overnight exercise. You don't just turn it on. There's got to be some planning and thought put into it. Now, the first part I do want to start off with is where everything really starts, is your basic Microsoft Purview information protection. And you can decide to encrypt or not encrypt, but from a organization's point of view, there's a few things to think. How do we classify our data? If it contains personal information, are we going to classify it as highly confidential? If it's contracts, should we class that as highly confidential? And you can build classification trainers by giving it the number 400-500 documents, train your classifiers, and then deploy it across your organizations, where you can classify documents automatically depending on what the data is inside that document. The good news is this is all built into the labeling, and the protection is built in. It can also be extended to non-Microsoft documents. And we got to remember as well that Microsoft encrypts all of the data in transit and in use. But being able to classify the document and that classification move with the document is absolutely critical. And especially where you start using things like Copilot or sharing information. If I use Copilot to create a new document, referencing a document that was classified as highly confidential, the new document I create will automatically be classified as highly confidential. And all of the rules that we apply around that highly classified document will be retained. And I think from organizations' point of view, this is probably the area they start off with first. How do I classify documents? What documents do we want to classify? What information is critical to the organizations? Because everything else out of Purview leverages classifications and labeling. Now, with information protection, it's all integrated into the Microsoft 365 apps already. It's part of SharePoint, it's part of Office. You can use it in Exchange, Power BI, all of your normal apps, and you can also extend that into non-Microsoft products. The big challenge I normally see for organizations who's leveraging the business premium license is that it only allows manual classifications of documents or specific location classifications. It doesn't do the automatic classifications of documents. And for customers, normally with the M365 E3, E5, it's do they have the compliance module added on, or I've got M365 E5, I've got all of this in place, where do I start? And it all starts with understanding what is our data, how do we work inside the business, what labels are we going to apply, and how is that going to affect my users? So start small, test, and get an understanding of how classification works. Now, once you've classified your data and sensitive information, It's leveraged across the rest of the Purview stack. As I say, information protections, you can have the auto labeling provided you've got the right licensing applied. So all of the sensitivity labels will be applied automatically. It will classify it. For example, we can see it's HR, that's highly confidential, limited to HR only, or you can have it cannot be printed, but it's very much what's the situation. Then you can start implementing data loss prevention policies based on those classifications or labels that you put in place. For example, if a document's classed as highly sensitive, do not allow it to be mailed outside of the organizations. If the document really needs to be shared outside the organization, it needs to be declassified by somebody in authority that can lower the classification on that document. And this is where your policies, process, and procedures comes into place. As well as with the data loss prevention, you can create retention policies, and we will cover data lifecycle management a bit more detail, but retention policies or auto labeling based on where that document or email came in. And it will retain those documents based on what you said, 5 years, 7 years, 1 year, but also enforce that it's been deleted. Of course, most organizations have so much information that they don't really know. Why do we keep? And what I always hear is just in case. Well, have some data governance in place, what information you want to have apply to it. And then finally, as I said, auto retention to the policies or manual retention. Keep that in place. Help records what records you want to retain. This can be extended as well with the retention into SQL databases, for example, can be extended into other storage areas. But you've got to think about what is our records management policy and how do we adopt it inside the organization. Now, with data loss prevention, as I said, it prevents data sharing or sensitive. And depending on the license if you've got is because you can automatically classify a document if I detect personal identifiable information, for example, a credit card. If I detect a credit card, we don't want it to be sent out via email. Because we detected a credit card, we classify it as highly sensitive, and we now have a data loss prevention policy that says highly sensitive attachments or emails cannot be sent outside the organization, and it will block the email from being sent or being delivered. And what you can do is this can be extended onto the endpoints. It can work across your cloud apps, so we can look at information being uploaded to Salesforce, for example, Dropbox, OneDrive, all of the areas that you might be sharing externally. So get your data loss prevention policies built in. As long as you've got Defender for endpoint deployed, you can extend those data loss preventions right up onto the endpoint as users are deploying the data. And because you have all of the flexibility regarding what can be deployed, what can be classified, what can be shared, or at least you can enforce that even if you let the users declassify the information, it makes them think, why am I declassifying this document to share it externally? But again, it's all about the process, the procedures, the training, and understanding what information is sensitive around your organization. And let's be honest, data loss is probably the biggest issue we have with the internal risk, where we share information accidentally that nobody else should have seen, or share with colleagues that shouldn't have been seen. So think about this data loss prevention. How do we share it? What information is in place? And what I normally get as well, we don't really know what we have in regarding data loss prevention. Go to the Activity Explorer, go and have a look at what information you have in place. Look at what type of action is taking place. For example, how many files are copied to the cloud? How many files have been created? What information do you have? How much of that potentially contain personal identifiable information? So you can start getting a better understanding of documents, etc. That contains information. But have a look at it. Act on the alerts when you do get them in place, because think about when somebody does something they're not supposed to, or trying to share information. Why are they sharing it? Is there something we should be concerned about? Why is this information potentially being shared outside the organization? So it does come down to being able to understand what information is being shared. As I mentioned as well, you got the insider risk management, and this is the area that we don't always see utilized enough. But insider risk activity is really there to help us understand what users are doing. And a good example is on my day-to-day job, I normally access one document. However, this weekend I suddenly downloaded 100 documents. Or you can also look at thinking, well, dynamic risk. Adriaan is being a medium risk. Suddenly my account has shown some identifiable that it's been compromised or possibly compromised. So I'm high risk, and now suddenly I'm accessing more documents or doing different behavior than what I would do on a day-to-day basis. Again, you can start getting those alerts to act on, and as I say, half the time they might just be benign or user training required, but also some of these might need to go with HR or legal to be investigated further. Why did Adriaan print 100 documents on Monday? That's not normal. I've accessed 100 sensitive documents and printed them all. There should be a questions possibly asked around that. What as well, where's data being uploaded to? What activity am I doing? And we got to have that understanding regarding what those individuals are doing. So explore the insider risk management, understand what it is, act on those, and this can also be fed into your security center if needed. Next one we talked about is the lifecycle management. As we said before, you can do auto classifications of certain data, which will say, for example, anything related to HR or finance retained for 7 years or 10 years, depending on what your policies are on locations or the type of information it contains. But you can create that, but then also enforce a policy that will say, once it gets past that 7 years, run the deletion of that information, remove it out of our system, to ensure that we don't retain information we don't need beyond what is legally required. Because unfortunately, organizations retain information for too long, or accidentally go and delete data they're not supposed to, or change it. But as we move forward, you need to just demonstrate compliance as well with certain situation, with certain guidance, NIS2, etc. There is ways that you need to show that you have a way of governing your information, understanding your information. And let's be honest as well, the more data we have, the more chances are of when it's compromised, or if it's compromised, that people will have that information. Did we really need it? Why do we have so much information inside the business that's not been accessed for 5-10 years? Because normally we just don't have the resources to clean it up, or the people who used to work with it has left, so we're keeping it just in case. Being able to classify that information in the beginning and managing how long it should be retained is a fantastic way of helping you with your life cycle management. Now, the last part of Purview is risk and compliance. How do we identify more of our risks? How do we reduce our risk? And how do we deal with compliance? Well, Microsoft's got the Purview Compliance Manager built in, and again, it depends on the license you have. But what you can do is start accessing the premium frameworks and match your compliance policies, your tests, your evidence regarding the compliance. A good example of these are ISO 27001, the new NIS2 regulation that was published, Cyber Essentials. But for everybody who's got M365 E3, or sorry, E5, you get access to 3 premium compliance modules by default. So go and have a look at those, activate those, understand how much of it is being done by Microsoft, how much is done need to be implemented by yourself. But you can create assigned tasks to individuals, you can provide tests, you can upload evidence regarding those particular tests that you have to do, and especially for organizations that has to comply with the new NIS2 regulation, go and start off with there. Go and map out how close you are, how far you are from your NIS2 regulations. And I believe DORA will be coming as well for organizations interested in the Digital Operations Resilience Act. They're talking about that being added. But we need to just keep keep an eye on it, use it, go and understand it, because a lot of this information can be provided to you dynamically, directly out of your 365 Azure environment. So leverage Compliance Manager if you haven't done so already. Purview audit or advanced auditing for the customers is very much giving you access to the basic audit features. For a lot of the customers, 30-day auditing is available, but the advanced auditing should be extended to 90, 180 days, or can also be extended to 10 years if needed, or sent into Sentinel. But the reason why we want advanced audit is normally for where you see breaches inside your organization. What emails has been downloaded, what information has been accessed, what information was actually compromised when you had a breach. And this is where it becomes very beneficial to have the advanced auditing inside the organization. Because too many times we're being asked to go and look at a potential breach, we get there and there's no more logs, or it happened so long ago that the logs has been retained, or we can't evidence what has been downloaded out of 365 because advanced auditing has not been enabled. Again, this is an M365 E5 feature. Unfortunately, you'll see a lot of what I cover is M365 E5. Microsoft do know how to make a good license queue, as the saying goes. We've also got communication compliance, and I think, again, an area that that's easy to configure. You can look at what information you have. Is there any violations, for example, inside our organizations in regarding how we speak to each other? So, for example, I've got profanity communication compliance policy activated inside the organization. Look at how is people being spoken to, what type of information is being shared, what type of information is coming across between each other, because what it helps with is look at offensive language, for example. Is there some sort of conflict of interest inside your information? What data is being shared? But you can also look at when people are, you can get information regarding compliance, regarding your AI usage of Copilot. Definitely have a look at it, and you can look at is messages being sent again regarding that contains personal identifiable information or anything that you've trained with your trainable classifiers. But looking for these violations and potentially have incriminating messages, etc., being able to remove it is critical to organizations. And it's so funny how many times I speak to individuals where they'll go, well, I didn't realize messages are retained. I didn't realize those messages are indexed. I didn't realize people can go and get them afterwards. And we're seeing the number of times what people write down can be seen as offensive, is offensive, to be honest with you. And being able to have that information and being able to educate your users around that behavior is a great way of avoiding potential litigation or issues, HR issues, before they explode. So go and have a look at them. Look and investigate communication compliance further if you haven't done so. And then finally, we're talking about our e-discovery section, and we've covered this already before. How do I discover what information do we have? What information is held when I get a subject access request? How do I extract it? And by having the advanced e-discovery or e-discovery premium, as it's called, you are able to create holds while you're going through a potential litigation on emails. You can analyze what information is being shared, what information is being held, what conversations being done, any documents that potentially have that information. But also being able to browse that information, get rid of the data that you don't want to share or don't need to hand over, because with basic e-discovery, you get one large PST file with all attachment with all of the content in place. What you can do is very quickly understand what information is being held in SharePoint, remove the potential duplicates, remove our information that's confidential, and make the process just a lot easier for organizations. But again, this is accessed through Purview. This is very much part of the Purview e-discovery set. Now, just trying to wrap this up, and as we've started through all of this area, how do we plan for our security and compliance journey? Well, firstly, understand your data, understand what information we have, understand what is our goal going to be. Then, once you've assessed your data, start protecting them. Create the data labels, create the understanding of how we've labeled that information, why are we retaining it, what's the retention. Then configure your data loss prevention policies. How do we stop the data loss? How do we then also manage on an ongoing basis, govern that information that's being shared? How do we keep reviewing and retraining the system, make it more easier and more specific, avoiding the users? But in the meantime, also monitor for threats. For example, has data been shared? What information is being shared? Reviewing on an ongoing basis what content you have. As I say, you can also create in your e-discovery session, you can go through logs, etc. But monitor your security, monitor this process, because I think most of the people believe we put it in, we configured it once and it's fire and forget. It's not the case. You need to constantly review what information there is, what alerts are being generated regarding potential data breaches, compliance issues, what information has been declassified on an ongoing basis, why was it declassified. It could be that you have potentially misconfigured some of your data retention, data policies inside the organization. But very much think about how we're going to approach your process, but it all starts with understanding the data and how we either going to set our compliance policies, retention policies, and information protection policies. So in summary, before we get to any questions and answers, if anybody has asked anything, is think about and identify what is my objective and goals for implementing Purview and data management inside our organizations. What licenses do I have? What's it capable with? How am I going to leverage that inside my business? Because I've seen organizations that decided to classify and encrypt all of their data to start with, not thinking about it, and it turned into a business disruption process. Because they've encrypted everything, the impact on the users was so significant and severe, it took them ages to recover. And that is the absolute critical part. Start small. Test who you're labeling your data with in your groups that you're with. Understand how it's going to impact your data use on a day-to-day basis, how it's going to impact your operational procedures. It's that balance between business risks and operational risk. You need to keep that in place, but at the end of the day, we want to protect what I call our most sensitive information, our most important information inside the organization. Those will have the highly sensitive labels, and anything that potentially contains personal identifiable information, for example, credit cards, HR, the related subjects, might start there, and then work your way through the rest of the system, and then think about how we are going to deal with our retention policies. But start small and start expanding the scope, but map it out. Setting up the policies is not hard. It is more thinking about the impact and what do we want to do on an ongoing basis. It's that understanding of your business. And also remember, it will take time. It's a journey. It's not going to happen overnight. There's a lot of areas to cover and a lot of understanding. And because we've just covered data security, this feeds back directly into your normal security as well, infrastructure security, permissions, etc., that you've got to think about. And it's that layered approach that you've got to take. I'm going to move to questions and answers if there is any. And let me just bring up the Q&A section. So I'm just going to start off here from the bottom up. So I do apologize if it takes me a time. I'm just going to try and read some of the questions. Do users need the E5 for the AI plugins to work, or just E5 admin? At the moment, it's in preview, but I'm going to assume the normal Microsoft stance is everybody who benefits from a feature needs needs a license. So I believe that everybody is going to need the Purview. It's going to need a license for the compliance Purview license to take advantage of AI Hub. But it is in preview. They haven't finalized the licensing at the moment. So I believe you can just go and turn it on at the moment and have a look at it, deploy the plugins, have a look at it. But I would say to be safe, and if I have to answer it off right now, probably going to need the E5 compliance to take advantage of it, and that will be for every user. I know you can normally license one user and you can see it for everybody, but that's a breach of license because you normally have to license all features who will benefit from it. Any option for a quick demo of setting up Purview inside the risk rules? Yep, there's quite a few examples. We can try and do that from a point of view. We can pick that up on another session, or we can set up a one-to-one session, no problem. We can get somebody involved to reach out. But yes, we can definitely have that in place, show you from a point of view how to create those. There's a couple of templates that's pre-configured. I think there's about 4 or 5 templates that's already pre-configured, like profanity, and you can set your target groups and your target individuals. You then just need to configure who's going to receive it, who's going to review it, because you've got to think about that as well, who those reviewers are. It shouldn't normally be IT, it should be somebody in HR, compliance, or legal that is responsible for things like profanity or potential insider, depending on the insider risk. Normally it's compliance, somebody in compliance, legal, or HR that deals with a lot of those type of queries. Are there any add-on licenses for Purview, or do you have M365 Business to use Purview? No. For Purview, you can go and license almost every single one of these areas. So Purview is included with M365 Business Premium. And some of the features of Purview is included in Office 365 E5. There's a massive matrix regarding what's included, which parts of Purview you get. If you reach out to us separately, we can send you the Adobe document that's got it in. It's massive. I won't even try and share it on the screen because the print is too small, but you'll be able to see all of the features. So if there's a specific feature that you're interested in and just want to activate, you can do that. But if you had Business Premium, for example, you can do the manual labeling and classification, but it won't do the automatic one without the compliance module E5 compliance add-on in place. So have a chat with us. Happy to have a session to discuss that in a little bit more detail to see if there's which of the features that you're interested in, and we can get those licensed for you on an ongoing basis. What would be involved? Is there any further training on Purview? I'm doing really consuming. So data subjects access request. What you probably want to look at is Microsoft Purview, who's got a number of data subject access requests built into it, because you're right, it is a very much a time-consuming process. There is definitely training on advanced or eDiscovery Premium. We can try and find the link for you if you reach out to us afterwards, Amanda. I can try and pick that up for you. But what you can't find, Microsoft try and deduplicate. They can't do all of the deduplication. And what would be interesting is which Purview license you have, because if you're using the what I call eDiscovery standard, you can't dedupe. It's not as good as the advanced one. I almost said an incorrect word there. My view is it's not very good, if I'm blunt about it. The advanced eDiscovery is what really makes it, and Microsoft's quite clever. They have they put that in as a separate license, so can definitely show you what that's in place, can demonstrate the advanced eDiscovery if you're not using it at the moment, to have a look at that. And as I say, they also, Microsoft's got the specific section called DSAR in Priva, especially for digital subject access requests, but it's licensed per request that you make and need to do. It tends to be for organizations who has to do a large number of DSARs on an ongoing basis. So can definitely talk through that on a basis. And I had one comment came in yet. So you've got the eDiscovery Premium. Perfect. Yep, let's have a look at that. I can find you the link on how to use it, and there's a couple of training videos as well, because they do change it. But absolutely, we can help you with that from a point of view. But that's great. If you've got the premium version, you're halfway there, shall I say, from a point of view. Great. I'll give it 1 more minute for any other further questions that anybody may have. But if you do, please pop it in. While I wait for that, I will just finish off on a couple of final areas. If you haven't done so already, as I say, speak to your account manager. Think about having your security assessments, your Assess 365 completed. Do sign up for our next future events. The next series will be CISO, will be on the 26th of June. We have got a poll out regarding which subject we want a more deep dive in. Business maybe looking at advanced e-discovery premium sounds like it could be one of the subjects we cover, but we will be taking some feedback as well for these sessions. Please don't hesitate to give us feedback, what you want to know more of. As I say, this was a very quick whistle stop tour of Purview. If there's any of these areas you want to see in more detail or talk through in more detail, reach out to your account manager or respond to me directly. More than happy to pick this up. And as I say, if I haven't answered your questions or felt anything I said was not as you understand it, please connect to me directly. I think my LinkedIn details, my contact details has been provided. And thank you very much, everyone. Look forward to it and hope you found it useful. I'm just going to check any last questions. No, I don't have any last questions. So on that note, I'm going to say thank you very much and look forward to seeing you at the next one. Thank you very much.